Hello, everyone. Welcome to PopCultX, your go-to for all things pop culture from a Gen X point of view. I'm Danny, and along with Gabriel, we're here to chat with you about said pop culture. When we're recording this, it's the day after Independence Day. So everyone out there, hope you had a happy and safe 4th of July if you celebrate it here in the United States. Did you do anything fun, Gabe?
I actually went to go play bingo, like the old person that I am. But it was actually pretty fun. It was the first time that I've played bingo probably in many, many years. And someone, I didn't win, but someone that was there won $15,000. So
wow.
I didn't know that you could win that much playing bingo.
Wow.
So I don't know. I might be a bingo player now.
There are a couple of places up here that always offer bingo, say bingo here, bingo there. I've always I don't feel like sitting there doing that, but $15,000 might change my tune.
Yeah. It was pretty fun. It was, I went with some friends and it was all electronic. So you're not there like pushing the little
okay.
electronic on a screen, and it basically does everything for you. It gives you a little bell when you're one away from bingo. And then when you do get bingo, it tells you. So it does all the work for you. So really you're just there. It's almost like a slot machine where you're just seeing stuff go. And but it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's something different for sure. I didn't have any plans to go see any fireworks or do any barbecues or anything like that for 4th of July. So it was a nice change of pace for us. Let's say that.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, there was plenty of fireworks all over my house, not in my house, but around. It felt like I was in a war zone, not to belittle anything that's happening around the world, but it did feel that way. And it just kept going on and on into the wee hours of the morning. My poor dogs were just, beside themselves. So people out there, make it a cutoff time, like 11 or something like that. You don't have to be launching fireworks at 2 a.m.
Well, it was a school night. Like you have to go to work the next day. Like it's
doesn't matter, I guess.
Person, I'm so beyond Gen X. For me to say that I'm such an old man.
Well, speaking of old man, I watched a movie for the first time in its entirety last night that I hadn't seen before. The movie came out in 1975, and it's a little shark thriller you might have heard of called Jaws, and it was really good. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I've seen bits and pieces, and especially iconic moments where Rob Schneider's like chumming the water and we see the first appearance of Jaws' head and he like gets startled back, I've seen that. I've seen, we're going to need a bigger boat and all the main moments, but I'd never sat down and watched it in its entirety until last night. And Steven Spielberg, well done.
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised you've never fully watched it because it is such a classic. It's a classic horror film movie. It's kind of created the whole genre of like animal horror where, you had Jaws or Orca or piranhas and all of that stuff. And I think it's single-handedly responsible for like creating shark phobia for so many people.
Yeah, I think so.
And being eaten by a giant shark. But it's such a classic movie. I agree with you. Hats off to Steven Spielberg. I would probably say that it's probably one of his best films.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that it's better than like Schindler's List or anything like that, but it's definitely up there in the top 5 of his best films for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. I completely agree with that. And I don't know, it caught me off guard a little bit by how well done it was. I mean, you think today's movies, right? And how heavily CGI they are and how heavily leaning filmmakers are on that technology. But to realize that he didn't have that back then, it was all practical effects. It was all working with the technology of the time. And it just holds up. It really does.
Yeah. It's a great film. It's definitely like I said, a classic.
Yeah, it really is. So this was Comic Book Wednesday today, because we're recording on a Wednesday out there. I picked up a fun book, and it is the latest Daredevil, the Sardaski number 13, which is sadly that he's coming to an end for his run on Daredevil. I'm a big fan of Chip Sardaski's work. I followed him across all of his independent work, Newburn, Public Domain, and of course his Daredevil, and Batman. He's written Batman too for a while. Anything you pick up at the store today?
I did. I picked up. What did I pick up? I picked up Disney Villains Maleficent. I don't know if you've seen that. I picked that up. I picked up the Spider-Verse new issue of that. I think it's issue number 4. I picked up. What else did I pick? There was like 4 or 5 comics that I picked up. Those are the top ones that are coming to my head. Daredevil and Echo number 2 I picked up. And
which cover did you get?
I got the variant cover. Variant covers.
I picked up the David Mack variant cover. That was really cool.
That's the one I got. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really nice.
It's such a standout. I mean, I had to get just for that particular cover itself is a really amazing job of that. And then I also ordered off of eBay Storm number 2, the Maria Wolf there. I cannot find it anywhere. So I had to go to my fellow nerds online to help me out and buy one of the copies from one of them. So.
And I'll probably be joining you later on this month in eBay for the Daredevil Echo Maria Wolf variant cover as well, because I think it's going to be hard to come by.
Yeah. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I'll be able to find it, but if not, there's always eBay, right?
Yeah. I also picked up a back issue, and it's by an author or a writer that I'm really excited to announce that will be joining us momentarily. And I picked up Magnificent Mrs. Marvel, of course, by Saladin Ahmed. So yeah, without further ado, I think we just get right into it, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to PopCultX Little Talk. Tonight or today or whenever you're watching this on the internet, we are joined by an Eisner Award-winning comic book writer who's written such icons as like Miles Morales, Black Bolt, The Magnificent Miss Marvel, and a couple of novels, his poetry. We are honored to be joined by Saladin Ahmed. So Saladin, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us here at PopCultX.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So the first thing that really intrigued me when I started reading some of your work was you have a very unique voice, I think, in comic book writing, at least to me, from what I got from it. So take us back a little bit, if you don't mind. Where did this passion for storytelling come from?
Yeah, I mean, it goes way back for me. I mean, I'm pretty recent to comics as a practitioner, but I've been reading comics my whole life. That was a lot of what taught me how to read was reading, particularly Marvel comics. And, I'm from a sort of immigrant working class enclave near Detroit. And it wasn't necessarily the best formal schooling, but my dad was like a big reading geek, even though he was sort of mostly self-educated. He always had like science fiction, fantasy stuff around it, and also comics, not only like some superhero stuff, but like, this is back in the 80s. So like early black and white stuff, like, I remember getting the first like Ninja Turtles issue before it ever cartoon or anything like that. My dad coming home from the comic store with it. So I always had that geeky influence around me. And so when I went on later to write and to be creative, with a lot of family and community encouragement, fortunately, which not everybody gets. Yeah. I went into things like poetry, short stories, some creative nonfiction writing. But even that stuff was always influenced. In the back of my head was like the kind of D&D nerd stuff and the Marvel comic stuff, and so, and DC to a degree too, but Marvel's always been like kind of my first home with superheroes. And I held on to that as I wrote this other stuff, as I taught classes, for instance, at university, did a lot of different things. And then eventually published a novel, which was a fantasy novel called Throne of the Crescent Moon, sort of a sword and sorcery novel, but with like a Middle Eastern setting.
That's cool.
And based on that and on me talking lots about comics on Twitter and some short stories and things, the Marvel editor, Will Moss, came to me And he's the same guy who brought like Ta-Nehisi Coates onto Black Panther, Eve Ewing onto Ironheart, just like sort of have been doing some reaching out of kind of traditional comic circles to find writers for some books. And because of the kind of science fiction-y fantasy background I was coming from, he thought of Black Bolt. You know, the Inhumans have always been kind of this weird corner of the Marvel universe, more, again, almost fantasy or science fictional than straight up superhero. And so, yeah, so it was, and I think I probably scared him because, you know, he's like, I'm calling for Marvel Comics. Like, yes, finally. You know, so,
it's excellent.
So, let me tell you my ideas. And of course, you know, you start with all this enthusiasm and then you learn how the business actually works, and you guys kind of like bump up against each other with that and find something in the middle. And, you know, the rest was sort of history with that. That was like 2016, I think I got that call, and yeah, just been steamrolling forward since.
Yeah, and something that you said that really interested me is the science fiction, or I'm sorry, the fantasy with the Middle Eastern kind of slant. A lot of people that we've been talking to on our podcast, people of color mainly, that are been fans of fantasy, felt really strongly about creating fantasy or science fiction with people of color in it because they were so desperate to see representation when they were growing up. How important was that for you to create something that you could see yourself or maybe like your community within?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, you know, that was central. That's always been maybe the other kind of big tent pole for me, other than kind of being into genre stuff, has been community stuff. You know, I was raised a very strong sense of myself as Arab American, as Muslim American. I unfortunately had that reinforced in negative ways by a lot of living in America over the past couple decades. I was a young man in my 20s in New York in 9/11, right? And it's always going to leave a mark. It's always going to affect the stories that you want to tell, the stories that you see that get ignored, the stories that you know are lies that are out there. And so you want to, you know, fix that. You want to do better. Just like with anything, you want to do better, right, as a storyteller. But there's a very particular flavor for those of us who are coming from a certain background. And so when I started to publish short stories and novels, it was kind of combining those two things, coming to these genres that I love, and then inflecting it with the stuff that you're talking about, Gabe. It's like, is Gabe or Gabriel? Is Gabe okay?
Either one.
I don't mean to shorten your name, but yeah, I would write a Western, for instance, or a cyberpunk story or something when I was doing prose fiction that would have a Muslim or Arab main character or somebody from a different kind of marginalized background. In fact, one of the first short stories I published was a sort of DC Marvel satire in prose, not in comics, called Dr. Diablo Goes Through the Motions. And it was a very short story from the point of view of a supervillain who's at like the big supervillain council meeting, right? And he's just like, can't stand it. It's boring, you know? And he's a Chicano guy. He's kind of like thinking about like incarceration because his cousin is locked up. And, you know, that was like, there are all sorts of characters in there that are clear analogs for Marvel or DC characters. I wrote a short story that was a clear Batman, you know, tribute short story without, you know, with the serial numbers filed off. So that stuff's always inflected my work, but I've always tried to have a kind of social or cultural edge to it too.
Nice. I noticed with a lot of your work, reading through it, you tend to take the characters and remove their superpowers so we can find out what kind of humanity they have. And I really appreciate that, because if you think about it, the characters are they superheroes because of their powers, or is it innate to their experience? And I think you deliver that really well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You're kind of giving away my tricks, because it's definitely, you're going to see that happen to almost anybody I write, because I think it strips them down to like their human self, even if they're a mutant or an elf or whatever else they are. Right. Ultimately, these characters are humans for us, android, whatever. They're still human. But I think also, like, just for dramatic purposes, you take a character like Black Bolt, right, who's like, you know, practically not quite omnipotent on the Marvel scale of things, but certainly like, pretty dang close and a lot closer than typical Marvel heroes. So what's going to threaten this guy, right? You can sort of go with like an arms race of being like, well, this guy's even more powerful. Well, this guy's even more powerful than him, right? But it loses any weight, right? And so if you instead make him like, somebody punching you in the mouth hurts again, right? Like that's cool to me. That's more interesting to me and you can threaten people in a way that you can't otherwise. So yeah, that's definitely one of my trademarks, and I will continue to use it, even though
you should, especially with Black Bolt. I'll just say, and I'm not giving away any spoilers here for people who haven't read the series yet, but
6-year-old book
with Crusher Creel's funeral, that really hit me. I don't know why. I wasn't expecting that. And it was just such a wonderful, touching moment to see his almost redemption arc in a way, and how we had Captain America come and speak at his funeral. It was just such a very human thing to do. So in Human Book, you added a human element. So I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. Yeah. I will always. That's another one. If it's a Marvel book, Steve Rogers is probably showing up and giving a speech at some point. So if the book goes more than 5 issues, that's probably going to happen. So, there's like there's certain touchstones for us. And with Crusher, it's funny. I will just say quickly that was my crazy when Will Moss called me. I was like, I want to write a Crusher Creel book because I'd been in love with that guy since like Secret Wars back in the day, and he's kind of a lunkhead, working class guy. Reminds me of uncles of mine, for instance, right? That in a way that he's dealing with thunder gods and aliens, but he's just this guy. And I think you need somebody like that beside a character like Black Bolt for Black Bolt to make any sense, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to ask you, both Danny and I are geeks that are been really influenced by pop culture, and we're both Gen X, and I think you're Gen X as well. So growing up, what were some of the things that influenced you to help develop your voice? What comic characters did you really grow up liking? What movies really helped you, or not necessarily helped you, but really influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like maybe the text for me, we talk about being Gen X is probably like Return of the Jedi, right? Like I saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater when I was 5 and I fell asleep. And then I went to school the next day and all the older kids were like, "Oh, Darth Vader's Luke's father." I was like, what? But Jedi, I was like, fully primed for, ready. And there's a book coming out this year actually called From a Certain Point of View. It's an anthology series of prose stories that Star Wars has done, and they've done it each year in the 40th anniversary of each film. And so they're doing a Return of the Jedi one this year, and I wrote a story from the point of view of the Rancor Keeper. Okay. That's always been my guy, right? So that, but really, there's some film influences. We just watched a lot of movies back then, but comics, there's the fantasy stuff. I've spent a lot of time like more reading D&D books than actually playing the game a lot, but a lot of video game influence on my stuff. But yeah, Marvel was really my core texts growing up, and like within that, right, that Bronze Age stuff, the Claremont X-Men stuff, obviously, Jim Shooter's Secret Wars, I must have probably read 20 times, the Miller Daredevil and the Nascenti Daredevil. There are a bunch of writers there at Marvel that were just working on different random books in the 80s. Tony Isabella, Tom DeFalco, Bill Mantlo. That was like, they were these really wacky superhero books to some degree, but they just had these grounded social aspects to them, and I think that always impacted my idea what superhero stories could be going forward.
Cool. And you've written, like I said, introducing you, many iconic characters. Walk us through like your process. How do you get into their shoes, and how do you find their voice when you're writing them? Is there do you just research the character, what you've been given, or what is that process like for you?
Yeah, the research thing is like it depends on the character, and it's always a dance because it can be overwhelming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even with a character like Black Bolt, right, who's like a fairly obscure character to some degree. The number of appearances, sheer number of appearances, is like, you know, absurd. So like going back now, that was my first Marvel Comics gig. You know, I was only writing one comic at the time. Black Bolt's a super kind of, again, pretty obscure character. So I was able to go back every time he came up. But you can't do that with Daredevil, right? It's which will be who I'm writing. First issue dropped September, I think.
Yeah.
And so with a character like Matt, right, you're going to go back, revisit the kind of highlights, try and dig into some little weird bits that maybe aren't quite so well remembered by everybody. But you also think about, for me, what does each character need, right? Because it's a very different thing to me writing a book like Miles was versus Black Bolt versus Daredevil, right? Because a book like Black Bolt, you're really mostly introducing a lesser known character to a wider audience and giving some sort of fun Easter eggs to the few weird hardcore fans, right? Those few who always find me at conventions. They're like, "Oh, Black Bolt's my favorite. I love you guys." So you give a little to those folks, but you're sort of really giving this character a broader exposure, right? Then you have something like Miles, where this is a new character, where Kamala was the same deal, right? Where you're I was the first writer after their creators to work on it, right? So that to me was about establishing those characters and giving them like superhero legacy, right? Because I don't think you don't really become a full-fledged kind of mythic superhero until lots of people have told your story, right? So after Bendis told Miles' story, Willow had told Kamala's story, it was like, let's take them and make them superheroes by putting them through different kinds of paces, right? Mm-hmm. And that's still a different thing than Daredevil, right? Matt is like, there aren't that many new paces to really put him through. He doesn't need to be established in the canon, and nobody needs to have it explained who he is, right? So really what people are looking for when you do that is like, something unique. What are you doing? What's your take that nobody's done? What's the unique voice, to bring it back to what you were first asking about, that you bring to this character? And so, each of those is like a different challenge. I love going back and forth from one to the other. And, you always hit some and miss some on all of those things.
I get a sense that not only do you immerse yourself into the world of the character, but that you're also still bringing in current events. How important is it for you to include that in your work, the things that are actually happening in our real world, and how does that influence your comic characters?
Yeah. I try to have it influence the work, not in a sense of like, what's in the headlines today, because that'll always end up being dated, right? But the general trends, unfortunately, of politics tend to, persist over those few years, right? Mm-hmm. We're in an era of kind of increasing fascism right now. We're in an era of kind of increasing just kind of person-to-person violence over the dumbest shit, Mm-hmm. And there are all sorts of the world's burning, right? That stuff's not going away. And so you're not being like topical, quote unquote, by dealing with it, or trendy. You're just kind of speaking to reality to some degree. And even any fantasy has to have some element of reality, or else it's kind of useless. You can't even escape into it if it doesn't have some connection to the real, right? So but at the same time, readers, listeners, we dealt with this. I'm always working in different genres. I was working on a Batman Unburied, the audio series for Spotify, which dropped last year. And we've got a follow-up called Riddler Secrets in the Dark. It's dropping at some point this year. And, those are both like the Batman stories, the Riddler stories, but they're also stories about like, corruption, about police violence, about sort of marginalization, about money and power, and I think that you have to have some element of that. And in my Miles stories, you're trying to tell a superhero book that's fun for 12-year-olds, right? That they can read and enjoy. But you also, Miles is a young Black Puerto Rican man, or young. There's a scene where Jeff is like, oh, he's a young Black man, and Rio's like, he's not a man, he's my baby, So it's like he's not, he's a kid, And so, but the fact that we put that scene in there, is like, it'd be weird not to just sort of, people talk about it like it's like a lack of politics. It's apolitical to not talk about that. I just want to have an adventure story, but you can't. You're always doing something political, and by not talking about this, you're taking a side. So, you try and do it in a way that's still fun and entertaining, and like doesn't leave people feeling like they're being preached at, but leaves them feeling like they're seeing something new.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, we are a pop culture show. So with that in mind, what sort of things are you currently reading or watching? Or you said video games. So are you still playing video games? Or what is currently takes up the rest of your time when you're not writing?
Well, I've been, it's funny because I spent many, many years of my life just reading difficult novels and poetry and stuff. And a lot of other years just like reading a lot of comics, a lot of watching, funky movies and stuff. And recently it's been almost exclusively video games in my spare time. It's kind of wild. It's, I'm watching, catching up on What We Do in the Shadows because the next season is dropping, and it's like such a good show. It's like, and it makes me laugh. Not a lot of things left in the world that make me laugh. So, it's like, gotta get that in. But mostly it's video games. And so right now I'm playing Slay the Spire, which is like a card game, like a roguelike thing. But my Yakuza series is like, that's like my
okay.
At the core of my heart is anything made by Atlas, like Persona games. So the writing in video games in general, and the storytelling to me is really where some of the, for all my respect for my fellow comics writers, for all the great TV writers I know, I think some of the most exciting writing happening right now in the world is happening in the video games. So it keeps pulling me back in every time, like pick up a novel. I'm like, I'm just going to do this sub story, this side mission. And,
I agree.
Hours later. So,
I'm currently playing Diablo 4 and I have a couple novels I need to read. So it's like,
So I never played the original Diablos, but my kid and I got 4 just to like have something to like whatever, play mindlessly during summertime. And yeah, it's a time suck.
Yeah, it is.
it's an alternate mind state. You're just sort of like, what? It's like being in a casino when they don't want you to know what time it is. You look up and it's been 6 hours later. But
it's true.
You've touched upon your perspective on Daredevil, and can you give us a hint as to what's to come? I know you obviously probably can't share a lot, but is there some little bit of a hint that you could, or a tease that you could give us and our listeners?
Well, I can say that anybody who's been keeping up with Chip's run knows that Matt's in a kind of wild place right now, and so there's certainly like a big question, like how the hell is what the hell is Saladin Ahmed going to do come September? But and I'm not going to give much at all away, really. We've even written the solicits for this book. It's kind of an uphill battle. It's kind of like tilting at windmills, but we're really trying to preserve some big surprises. I'm not a big big reveal, big shock writer, but with this book, we've got some pretty wild stuff built in, a wild premise, some crazy things that happen, some cool Marvel characters getting pulled in from various places. So we've been doing our best to not tip our hand too much. But I will say that, we've sort of taken the Daredevil, more than maybe any other book at Marvel, has this heritage of the creators connecting and of the of Matt getting left in a crazy position by the previous writer, right? And so Chip and I were quite aware of that. We had a great opportunity to like touch base with each other about where this was going to go, and Chip was kind of like, "Is this too wild?" Where he ends up, and I was like, "No, that fits perfectly with what I want." So it was just it was really nice synchronicity. So I think people will be pleasantly surprised, hopefully, come September.
Well, you answered my question, is how much you and Chip communicated and like the handoff. So yeah, I'm looking forward to September. Daredevil. I already have it on my pull list, and everyone else out there, you should as well. Also September, you have spine tingling Spider-Man coming out in print version. I just finished reading that in the Marvel Unlimited app, and that's really fun. That was really exciting.
I'm really excited about that because Juan Ferreira is like just a genius artist, and not everybody reads digitally. I get it. We did this. So Spine Tingling Spider-Man was like, basically I went to Marvel, like I have a horror pitch for Peter Parker. And because I'm also, when you talk about pop culture, I'm a horror movie nerd. And so I had a pitch for them. They were like, "This is a great idea. We're working on this unlimited stuff, the digital comics, where it's a scrolling platform. You think this could fit with that?" And it actually it fit great.
Oh, yeah.
The idea fit great, but then Juan's execution,
oh my goodness, yes,
incorporating the vertical scroll was just brilliant. He didn't phone anything in. Everything was like just dialed to 11. And the crazy part is, as he was working on it, he's like, "I'm also working on how these pages will translate to print." Like he was thinking about the whole time he was working on it, if we get it into print. And so now, come whatever, a year later, and Marvel's like, "Yeah, we're going to do a big oversized print." I think they're calling it a number 0. And it's going to be like 80 pages or some crazy, don't quote me on that, but it's some long size format. And it's just, I think I wrote a cool story. I brought in all the like scary stuff that I like, putting Peter through some grueling paces, getting a little more grisly in some ways than we sometimes get in Spider-Man stories, especially as coming from Miles Spider-Man. But for all my, fairly decent writing that I'm pretty proud of, Juan is like the star of this book. I really, I know I'm self-interested here, but he deserved the Eisner for the work he did on that book. It's so mind-blowing. It's some of the best Spider-Man stuff I've seen in years. So I think if you care at all about like cool takes on Peter and visual takes, like just at least pick it up and thumb through it, and you'll probably want to take it home.
Yeah, there are some cool scenes. Just seeing it through on my iPad, it's just very cinematic and just very mind-blowing. There's like one where he's just crouched on a perch, and it's just like, wow. Yeah, so yeah. Completely agree.
So one of my last questions here for you was, a lot of creators like to be involved with their fans, so some kind of step away from the interaction. Where do you fall? Do you like being on social media, or are you on social media where fans of your work can kind of have an open dialogue with you?
So it's funny you asked that, because I'm sort of in the midst of backing off of that. I think we had I've always been somebody who loved interacting with folks online. I've found a lot of my community there. I found a lot of friendship there. I found connecting with readers there has just been like nothing else. But it does feel a little like the times are changing a little bit right now in terms of being able to do that in a way that doesn't feel gross and manipulate. And just like with a lot of static around, so that it doesn't it's not that fun conversation it used to be. So for me, I'll probably continue to maintain a bare presence on social media, but I'm definitely, this year in particular, kind of made a concerted effort, and will continue even more radically to kind of like get off that stuff. But to me, the compensation for that has been getting back into seeing people in person. I've done a lot of local signings at my local shops here around Detroit recently, and it's just been great. And then I did C2E2 in Chicago this summer, planning to do New York Comic-Con in the fall. And it's been so good to see people in person again, and just like hear their voices, see the costumes, and people bringing their kids. Like that's where I'm going for my juice mostly from now on, I guess.
That's cool. That's cool. Or they can come here to our podcast.
Yes,
YouTube
actually,
show.
no, I was just gonna say, yeah, podcasts are the other thing. It's like I've started, for a long time I was just like kind of not dealing with interviews, and I've started to do that again too, because it's just to do this, to just sit with a couple people who love this stuff and talk it through is just a different thing than to be dealing with all that noise,
Yeah, completely agree. Well, we appreciate
projects that we know that are coming out, both Daredevil and Spider-Man. What else can our listeners look forward to of your work coming out?
There's always stuff cooking. One of the big things I've been working on recently is building a relationship with Image, and I've got a couple books with them. Star Signs, which I've co-created with Megan Levins, the artist, and Terror War, which I co-created with Dave Acosta. They're very different books, but both number ones dropped this spring, and they're both like just a few issues in. Star Signs is a book about sort of superhero inflected, a little bit of early X-Men, a little bit of Heroes, a little bit of stuff like that, but it's about the stars of the constellations of the zodiac falling to Earth and giving people superpowers, and then all the crazy stuff that happens after that. And then Terror War is a futuristic comic, sort of sci-fi horror comic. Again, looking at our pop culture influences, it's kind of like little Blade Runner, a little Aliens, a little Ghostbusters even. And it's about basically monster hunters in the future in a kind of cyberpunk city. So
that sounds like a video game. I like it. I'll have to pick that up. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate getting to know a little bit more about you, the writer, what your work is, where your influences come from. And so, yeah, thank you so much, Saladin. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. It's a great discussion. Appreciate you both.
Well, thank you once again for joining us here at the at our podcast. It was a great conversation that we had. Great to learn more about you as an author, and to give our listeners a chance to get to know you a little bit more, Saladin. So very much grateful for you taking the time to join us on our podcast. Any closing thoughts, Danny?
I just think it was really great, especially that you asked about current events and how he incorporates into his writing. And his answer was perfect in how he's looking at the trends, and he really does bring that into all of his writing. So out there, if you're out there, go put in your comic book store for the latest Daredevil that's coming out in September. Also pick up that spine-tingling Spider-Man. And if you have a chance, go read it on the Marvel Unlimited app. It's really great. Read it now.
I can't wait to get it into the print version. I do read a lot of stuff on digital format, but there's something about the physical copies.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Still, obviously, as I'm surrounded by comics, there's something about the physical copies that I still love, to be able to hold them and read it. So that I will definitely be picking up on both of those runs in September.
Right on. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for liking, sharing, subscribing. Be sure to share it out there with all your friends. Let them know where you can find the interview at for Saladin Ahmed. And we'll see you all next time.
Stay safe.